Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you. Welcome to Issues and Answers, New Mexico Public Education. I'm Fred Martino. New Mexico is under a judge's order to improve K-12 education, and it's one of the biggest jobs facing the state legislature as they meet in Santa Fe. One challenge is a teacher shortage, and critics say it's one that could have been prevented with regular cost of living adjustments. The state has failed to provide COLAs every year, and the results are dramatic. New Mexico's minimum teacher pay is $36,000, while new teachers in the El Paso Independent School District make more than $48,000. Yes, more than $12,000 additional, even before you account for the fact that Texas has no state income tax. In a moment, we will talk about that and much more with a panel of experts. But first, a look at the results of low teacher pay from Mallory Falk.
Robert Pounds was on his way to his favorite Whataburger to order the usual.
Number 2, Whata-size jalapenos.
When he noticed a giant billboard, Gadsden ISD hiring teachers. Pounds was already thinking about applying to teach in Gadsden. He was getting ready to retire after 27 years teaching science in El Paso. But he felt like he wasn't done in the classroom and thought it would be nice to make extra money on top of retirement. So that billboard caught his eye.
I said, wow, they really are out here. They're really looking for teachers. So I just sent an email. I said I presented my interest in the position, and I got an instant response.
He now teaches biology and chemistry at Santa Teresa High School in Sunland Park. Gadsden ISD wants to recruit more teachers like Pounds because, like many districts across the state, it's had trouble staffing schools. At the start of this school year, Gadsden ISD had about 40 teacher vacancies. Nicholas Wolgameth is the principal at Santa Teresa. He says the issue isn't necessarily getting enough candidates to fill those positions.
The quality of the candidates sometimes is a little concerning. Just not meeting the qualifications and the requirements that would best benefit our students here in the Gadsden district.
In the past, Wolgameth says, he's decided against putting unqualified teachers in the classroom.
We made the choice to leave those positions vacant until we were able to find the right person for the job.
This happens in schools all over the country and all over New Mexico. The Albuquerque Journal found that many districts, including Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces public schools, started off the school year with vacancies. Travis Dempsey is superintendent of Gadsden ISD.
Fewer and fewer young people are going into education as a career. So while we have more needs, we're not replenishing those pools.
More needs because Gadsden is one of the fastest growing school districts in the state. Dempsey says some prospective teachers might have been turned off by New Mexico's controversial teacher evaluation system.
When it first rolled out, it was pretty rocky, and teachers have been beat up a little bit with it. It really probably deterred a few people from going into education.
And for those who do go into education, there's not a ton of financial incentive to stay in New Mexico when they could earn substantially more money right next door in Texas. This problem is especially pronounced in Gadsden, a literal stone's throw from the state line.
So we're, 5 minutes away from El Paso, Texas. Their salary schedules are higher than ours. And to be competitive, we need to get those salary schedules higher, quite frankly.
For reference, the starting salary in El Paso ISD is a little over $48,000. In Gadsden, it's about $36,400. Despite these challenges, Dempsey and his team are working hard to fill every job opening. They got $40,000 from the state education department to dedicate to teacher recruitment and used it to launch an advertising campaign. Hence the billboard near Robert Pound's favorite Whataburger, plus TV and radio ads. Dempsey hopes the campaign reminds teachers on the job hunt that there's an entire school district between Las Cruces and El Paso.
We're between two much larger communities, and so sometimes we get a little forgotten.
In the future, he'd like to put that extra money toward new teacher stipends. Principal Nicholas Wolgameth says he's already seen a difference in candidates.
This year, compared to last year, our candidate pool has been a lot better. Well, we've been a lot more satisfied with who's come through our doors to interview for our positions.
Though it's hard to say how much that's due to the ad campaign. Robert Pounds isn't the only new science teacher at Santa Teresa. He's joined by 2 first-year teachers, one from El Paso and one from Wisconsin. They learned about the job openings from family members. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Mallory Falk.
Low teacher pay, just one of the challenges facing New Mexico public education. We'll talk about the challenges and the opportunities over the next hour, thanks to our partnership with the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces. From the League, we welcome Dr. Jane Asche, and from New Mexico State University, Dr. Betsy Cahill, and Las Cruces educator Mary Parr-Sánchez is here. She is Vice President of the National Education Association, New Mexico. Thank you all for being with us today on Issues and Answers.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Jane, I want to start with you. Tell me about some of the League research into critical areas where we need improvement in New Mexico education.
Okay. Well, I want to say first that the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces has, over the past 21 years, spent a lot of time studying education issues locally and at the state level and across the world. We've had an education position statement, which we use for advocacy with our legislators to work hard to impress upon them the need for adequate funding to really have an effective education system throughout the state. And just recently, we have spent a lot of time taking a good hard look at a special report by the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which includes a membership of 36 of the most prosperous countries in the world. And they have put out a report in 2018, late 2018, titled World Class: How to Build a 21st Century School System. And we have learned a lot from that study that I think has some clear messages for New Mexico. First of all, in the countries that perform very well on the PISA test, that's acronym of PISA, it stands for Program for International Student Assessment, a testing system for reading, science, math that's used across the world to look at student achievement and is given every 3 years. Over a longitudinal study of 18 years, they have learned a great deal about the countries that are doing very well on that test. And these are the things that do not make any difference about achievement. And number one, it doesn't make any difference where the country's located. Number two, it doesn't matter how wealthy the country is. Number three, whatever culture they are endowed with, that does not make a difference in outcomes either. The things that really do are that there's an acute awareness of underperformance by certain students, certain groups, in certain places, and that inequities are present in the education system. And so what they do is they begin to mobilize resources to address the inequities and to make sure that individual student needs are met, that the learning environment is very culturally responsive. That's very key and important. They also have the courage to experiment with innovations, and they have a tenacious public will to see that they have the best education system possible. And interestingly, how the countries begin to develop that public will is that the leaders convince people among the public that investment in education is the very best thing they can do for the country's economic prosperity. So one of the things that I find most interesting in the tremendous amount of reading I do of research across the spectrum is that when the education leaders in some of these countries that are doing so very well are asked, where did you learn how to do this? They say, in the American colleges and universities. How about that?
Yeah.
So we've got the expertise right here.
And let's move to that right now.
Okay.
From New Mexico State University, Dr. Betsy Cahill, tell me about some of the research that you want to highlight here, because this is such an important issue and important to understand that there is research that can tell us how to make improvements, that this isn't simply a shot in the dark. We know about things that work.
Yes. Well, I have to, of course, agree with we have to pay our teachers more, because as a person who prepares future teachers here at NMSU, we're not having people want to be teachers anymore. And when we ask our future teachers, or the ones that we're hoping we can recruit, they really say the pay just isn't there. And actually, we lose about 40% of our graduates. They go to other states. So it's exactly what the report just shared with you. My interest has always been early childhood education, and I wanted to share with you how we really look at the importance of, if you want to prepare children for academic success, you have to build their brain architecture from infancy. And we now know that that really is one of the biggest issues for New Mexico, and actually any state that's struggling. Because if you don't have a very strong preschool accessibility, which we're trying to build in New Mexico, and if you have poor quality programs, if they're expensive and parents can't go, then you can't do some of the most important things we know from neuroscience. We actually know that stress in the brain will influence a child's ability to be successful in school. So if we think about some of the stress that our poorest children are dealing with, hunger, perhaps addiction issues in the home, discrimination, all of that stress leads to the brain actually not developing as it could be. And we also know that if there isn't access to educational or learning experiences for whatever reason, these children, many of our children come to school in kindergarten and they don't have the vocabulary that's necessary to be successful in school. And I mention vocabulary because that's what's built actually within the first year of life, and people forget that. Children's brains are growing to be able to accept receptive language in a way that they can be successful in school. So we have to start very, very early if we're going to try to be successful, as Jane has said, in our schooling system.
And these points that you're making really emphasize something that unfortunately is often lost when we talk about education. That it's not just about teachers and schools. This is about helping parents and guardians of children, helping ensure, especially at the beginning of life, a good environment for kids.
Absolutely. And I would add to your list of how people are paid, your average early care and education teacher, who may even have a BA and a teacher's license, her pay is $22,000 a year.
Yeah.
So how are you going to even recruit preschool teachers, pre-K teachers who actually have the understanding of cognitive development to have the children be able to walk into an elementary school and be prepared for good learning?
A reminder that budgets do reflect our values, and this is serious business. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, the state is now under a judge's order to take action on this because of years of neglect. Mary, as an educator, your thoughts on the work that is already underway by the new administration in the governor's office and in the legislature. There is hope as the legislature works on this issue, I know.
So I am very excited and confident that the new administration in Santa Fe is going to address a lot of these issues that Dr. Betsy just mentioned, because they're talking about them, number one, and not pretending that they don't exist. Some things I'm very excited about also are the public education secretary designate that's been named, and that is New Mexico State University's own Dr. Karen Trujillo. Her undersecretaries or her deputy secretaries, Tim Hand, who is a former Las Cruces Public Schools chief of staff. So also very excited about Pedro Noguera from California by way of New York, and the work that he has done in equity in education and racial justice in education, and also disrupting these cycles that families get into that schools really haven't been able to get underneath, and to really disrupt these cycles of poverty and things that we see that plague our institutions. So,
and relating to what Betsy said, I know you and the National Education Association have been big advocates for community schools. We have a community school in Las Cruces, Lynn Middle School, correct?
yes.
Explain that very quickly for our audience at home and our studio audience, why this is important and how it works.
So a community school is simply a school that has a person called an on-site coordinator who is able to be the interface between the community and the school system. Right now, principals and teachers and bus drivers and all the other employees in the school are tasked with trying to bring the community into the school, but they simply don't have time to do it. A community school has a targeted person called an on-site coordinator that will work to create a hub in the school for many of these factors that children bring into schools, like chronic hunger. 44% of our students in Doña Ana County live in poverty, and the rest of the state, the statistics aren't much better. So if a child's hungry, they're certainly not going to be able to do their best work in school. So,
yeah, they've even seen where in a community school, students might be able to go and take food home for the weekend because there is no school lunch or breakfast program, of course, on Saturday and Sunday. They may be able to take food home.
That's correct. And at Lynn, I know that we provide food in 3 separate ways. One, we have a food bank for our family and community members if they do need to come in and get fresh fruits and vegetables. Another way is we have a snack refrigerator with healthy snacks. And a third way is we feed students dinner. 5 days a week after school. So because we know that many kids don't eat from Friday when they leave school until Monday morning when they come back.
Yeah, I want to just say something really quickly before we move on because it relates to community schools. And Mary, I wanted to get your opinion on this before we move on because you are an educator and you see the challenges directly. When I was living in Michigan more than a decade ago, we all have transformative experiences in life. And I wasn't expecting this one to be transformative, but I had a chance to go to a school once a week and read to young people. And I noticed that one of the young men that I was reading to regularly was struggling with attention, was tired a lot. And one day I asked him about that because he could barely stay awake during the readings. And he told me about challenges that he was facing at home, getting enough sleep. This is the kind of thing that I know when you have this community orientation, getting services to help young people when you see struggles is possible, is more accessible.
Absolutely. And I think the best thing about community schools is it is not a cookie cutter approach to education. It is a method that you engage and ask stakeholders, including the children that attend that school, what are their needs? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And then using your on-site coordinator, you try to beef up the things that they're good at, and you try to bring in resources for those things that that people need help with. Sleeping and the lack of sleep. I think if a study was done on that, it would especially in adolescent kids, and I know studies have been done, they don't get enough sleep, and it is a huge factor in their ability to function in the day. And the smartphone has not helped a lot of adolescents either, because they're connected 24 hours a day, and it really is impacting their sleep.
And of course, the related item here, when you do have folks who are from the community volunteering in our schools as well, you have, I think, the potential for a better understanding of the challenges that families, teachers, schools are facing. And when folks have to make decisions about public policy issues, they have a better understanding of that. I certainly did from that experience.
Yes, I think, and that is another reason that I'm very excited about the folks that we have elected and that have been appointed to the public ed department, because they have experience. And experience is a wonderful thing when it comes to education, because what people that are very removed from the classroom, what their ideas might be, would be very different from a person that knows the name of every child in that classroom and what their particular needs are. And it's also very different from school to school.
Okay, well, thank you very much. In a moment, we are going to hear questions from our studio audience. But first, a look at the importance of pre-K education. New Mexico Pre-K is a state-funded program in Las Cruces and other districts, but many educators say pre-K should be universal, and it's far from that in New Mexico. In depth, here's Mallory Falk.
It's the first day of pre-K at Jornada Elementary School, and there's a flurry of activity. Kids stack blocks precariously high, flip through picture books, and spoon feed their baby dolls carrots and mashed potatoes.
Oh, yes, this mashed potatoes. Oh, those mashed potatoes. These are spaghetti.
Jornada is one of 7 local schools that started offering New Mexico Pre-K this year. Evangeline Barella is principal here. When she got the call asking if her school would like to add a pre-K class, it was a no-brainer.
My first response was, yes, and where do I sign?
Jornada already had a Head Start program which serves low-income students, and a program called DD Pre for students with developmental delays.
But we had parents asking, what about students that may not qualify for either one of those programs?
It's hard to find free or affordable pre-K seats in Doña Ana County, or really any form of early childhood education. Erica Surova is with the Center for Community Analysis at New Mexico State University.
We did an analysis last year and we found that only 36% of children under the age of 5 have access to free or subsidized high-quality early childhood education. For children that are 2 years old and younger, there's even less access.
Only about 21%. It's hard to compare Doña Ana County with the rest of the state or country because Surova and her team have really specific criteria for what qualifies as high quality. But she says those numbers are troubling.
Because we have a lot of children under the age of 5 that are living in poverty.
About 44%, which is higher than the state average.
And if we don't provide these opportunities for children to, we're setting them up for failure, really.
A ton of brain development happens before kids reach kindergarten. Surova says it's critical to reach children at an early age when their brain architecture is actually being built. She says waiting until age 5 is too late. You can start to see language gaps in children at around 18 months. Research has found that early childhood education can make a difference. In states like Oklahoma and North Carolina, students in preschool programs ended up with higher test scores, lower retention rates, and, in North Carolina at least, fewer special education placements. But that didn't hold true in Tennessee, where most positive effects of pre-K faded by second or third grade. Surova says that's not necessarily an argument against pre-K.
One of the problems with looking at that type of data is that you don't know what happened between K and 3 if the teachers aren't capitalizing on that progress that the children are coming in with.
And many researchers agree the quality of pre-K and other early childhood education programs matters. You can't just dump a bunch of children into an overcrowded classroom, sit them on the carpet all day, and lecture at them. The most effective classes have a low student-teacher ratio and an evidence-based curriculum that involves lots of learning through play. That's what's happening here at Jornada Elementary. Children cycle through different stations, each intended to build and test specific skills. Martha Benavides is the new pre-K teacher.
When you go into the classroom, it'll look like chaos, but it's very much planned out play. And I explained to the parents that, you know what, they're going to come home and say, we played, and they did, but there's a lot of learning going on through play.
Principal Evangeline Barella says the demand for this type of program is high. She capped the pre-K class at 16 students and says there's a waiting list. Barella hopes the district can offer even more seats next school year. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Mallory Falk.
Thank you, Mallory. A great look there at the importance of pre-K education, one of the topics that we're talking about, and they're talking about in Santa Fe during the New Mexico legislative session. We have our first question from an audience member now, and I'm going to ask audience members to say their first name, and you can address your question to the entire panel or an individual. Welcome.
My name is Dale. I've been a preschool teacher my whole career, and I know how important it is. My question is, do you have any specific recommendations as to how to start quality preschool programs in New Mexico, and then how to enable parents to and encourage them to enroll their children in them?
Okay, thank you very much, Dale. Betsy, you talked about one challenge in regard to this with a number that you mentioned before our report that was probably quite shocking to many people, that average pay is $22,000 for pre-K teachers.
For early care and education
Early
teachers.
care and education.
If they're
okay.
connected to the public schools, they get the same as a public school teacher.
Okay, all right.
Because we have a two system. We have private childcare, which can get pre-K monies if they follow a specific curriculum and meet some of what are considered quality standards, low student teacher ratio, a curriculum that has been found to work, parent engagement, lots of other reasons that we look for high quality. I think the reason why some parents might not be interested in early care and education, I've been thinking about this a lot in New Mexico, and I've been here for 25 years, and I have said repeatedly, I think we have to figure out how to make it culturally responsive and of interest to communities. Because if you have families home who can take care of children, and where children learn about language and culture is with grandma and family, then why would you send your 3-year-old to preschool? So I think that's something that we have to figure out, how to make it something that is of interest to all communities. And it has to be community grown as well. Okay. I think the question also was related to how to make this happen in New Mexico. The good news is it's happening. I think we're going to get a lot more funding with our new support system up in Santa Fe. And I am pretty convinced we're going to have to produce a lot more teachers as well, because I think it will grow. How it will grow is sort of a question. There's a lot of conversation with starting a Department of Early Learning, and whether that's something that we want to do, where there's a focus on children and families. And the other idea is to have pre-K continue and maybe fully reside in the public education domain, the Department of Public Education, but grow it tremendously. So those are two of the options right now. Whichever option they do, I believe it will grow because we know it works. In New Mexico, it works very well. The children who go to kindergarten from our pre-K have shown tremendous growth, and they're ready to engage fully in kindergarten.
Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add on that question? Okay. Well, we'll move on. Your name?
Hi, my name is Elisa, and I'm always struck by the fact that New Mexico thinks it's New Hampshire, and it doesn't take into account its multicultural and multilingual history. And so our curriculum, and I think, Dr. Cahill, if you will permit me, when you said, why would some student come to school when abuelita is showing her English and Spanish at home? Because the school is not doing that. The school, in this school in New Mexico, we Latinos, Mexican Americans, and Native American students have been erased. We do not exist. Our history is not there, our language is not there, our culture is not there, and yet we want kids to be motivated to learn. It's not gonna happen. We can talk about all these other issues. The main issue from my point of view is that, and the case that came before what is it, Yazzie versus Martinez, that really has to do with culture. We need to be included. Our language, our culture is important. And we could be a global leader in multicultural and bilingual education, multilingual education, if we put our mind to it.
Okay, and this is interesting, Jane. You mentioned that studies of this all around the world show the importance of this. Countries that do well have a culturally competent education.
That's correct. Canada is a very good example of that. They have one of the largest percentages of immigrants of any of the countries around the world. And what they do is they integrate into the curriculum culturally relevant content for each and every culture that is found in their school. And this makes a huge difference in the students feeling respected. And when students feel respected and valued, it becomes much easier for them then to learn and achieve with confidence. In Canada, 3 years after immigrant children enter the country and enter school, they are performing on the PISA, on academic tests of achievement and on PISA as well as the top scoring students in Canada. There is almost no difference between performance. And I think that that shows that when you, as Elisa was talking about, when you show respect for a child's culture and you encourage a multilingual community and a diverse community that celebrates and integrates all the cultures instead of insisting that children conform to the culture of the mainstream power structure, you get great results. They have demonstrated it.
So interesting. All right, we have another question.
Hi, my name is Eileen, and I'm an educator and a member of the League of Women Voters. And Jane mentioned the book World Class. And one of the things they talk about in that book is how important the teacher is. And we want to attract and retain good teachers. In the book, they talk about the importance of having lifelong professional development and that teachers are collaborating and working together. So what is being done in our state and what more can be done to help teachers have more planning time and more time to work together and learn from each other?
Mary, let me have you address that question. I think this is extremely important, a very important issue.
I would love to address this question. Planning time is a huge issue in our schools, especially now that we have a teacher shortage where we need our mentor teachers. Like in the clip that we saw with the gentleman that came from El Paso that was coming into Gadsden to teach, but he was also with 2 other first-year teachers. We must build in time for our experienced educators to have time during their day to mentor educators just coming in. Many of our schools have more than 50% of their staff are in their first 5 years, and many of them will not make it to 5 years because they will leave. And so what we can do is we can fund more people so that we can build schedules with enough people that we can take the time to mentor and invest in the people that are coming to us.
Okay, we have another question now. David Greenberg is here from Las Cruces Public Schools. Hi, David.
Thank you, Fred. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a terrific discussion, so thank you. But I was curious, what would you all say to your average person, your average viewer in Doña Ana County? What would you encourage them to do, or how can they get involved in shoring up our public education system? Hopefully they start by watching this program, but then what?
So one thing I think would be amazing is to stop this drumbeat of failure that we have been hearing about coming from our public schools. There are things that we absolutely could improve upon. Nobody will deny that. But we also produce very many successful, well-educated students. So whenever we're starting to hear about a failed school or that school has an F, which thank goodness the legislature is going to do away with, that people will challenge that narrative with a different narrative of success. So Jane, I know you wanted to say something.
Well, I just think that the community school is a perfect example where you bring in, you surround families with services, and you bring in parents to be a part of helping create knowledge and make decisions, but also parents and citizens need badly to contact their elected representatives, their state senator, their representative, and say, we want adequate funding for education. And they need to tell them that in countries that do this, many of them started out near bankruptcy with much of the population in abject poverty. And as they raised the standards for education, as they focused on quality teaching, the prosperity of their country went straight up.
Yeah.
Singapore in 50 years went from a third world country to a first world country.
Okay, another question.
Hi, I'm Erica, and the World Class Report put a lot of emphasis on local autonomy. And I would like to know how much power does the local teaching staff have on deciding what it is they want to teach? And also, what can the local school board decide?
Okay, so this is a very good question, Mary. I know this is something that the NEA has been very concerned about, and really this has occurred in other states as well, that there's been a concern about not enough local control, not only in districts, but of course in the classroom, control for the individual teacher.
Right, so we have entered an era of top-down micromanagement from federal and state government, and I believe that educators do not have the autonomy that they wish that they had and that they need to have. That would, Governor Lujan Grisham is talking about an education moonshot, and that would be a game changer. If we remember what that moonshot did back in the 1960s, is it inspired a generation of creative thinking. And there were a lot of spin-offs from that the space program that really challenged and inspired people. So instead of micromanagement and standardization, we need to move in the opposite direction, where we listen to our stakeholders at our schools, our abuelitas, the neighborhood, the businesses around the school, and we bring their knowledge into the school.
Okay, another question.
Yes, this is really for all three of you. One of the issues our state really seems to be grappling with is this idea of a standardized versus an individualized education for our children. On the one end, you have standardized, there's this argument for we need data, we need to make sure that we have a way to measure the learning outcomes and that our kids are learning what they need to. And then on the other end, you have, this idea of individualization and valuing the uniqueness of our people. In fact, we're in a lawsuit now, right? Because our state has failed to provide an education that's culturally and linguistically relevant for every student. And so I would like to hear your thoughts on just how might the state balance those things moving forward?
Let me start with you on this, Betsy. You can do both, right?
Well, I think we have to.
Yeah.
We have to because it's the right thing to do, and we have to also because of the lawsuit. And we have to figure out how to have schools localized enough so that the community is represented and the language and the desires of the families are embedded within the curricular decisions. Previously, I would hear teachers talk about we have to have fidelity to our textbooks or to our curriculum. And I would like to suggest, and I'm sure people would agree, we have to have fidelity to the community. What is our responsibility, and how can we still have a vision and standards that ask our students to reach for the stars and have high expectations, but also honoring the individual identity and how important that is for the growth in the classrooms. And good teachers already do it, and we have to talk to our good teachers about how they're doing it. And I think we have the answers.
Yeah, and not just doing, to your point earlier, Mary, celebrating success. Again, when I think about transformative experiences, I will never in my life ever forget an interview that I did in this studio about a decade ago when a young man who has since graduated from New Mexico State University and is a successful business person, told me how he came to Las Cruces at the age of 14 from El Salvador, didn't speak any English, and in Las Cruces public schools became fluent in English, and he speaks perfect English, graduated from New Mexico State, very successful, and he's now very successful in the business world. There are so many stories of success like this, and that is a success for him, but it's also a success for our teachers.
Absolutely, and those are the stories that we need to talk about. And we live in a border community. There were a couple of rallies in El Paso last evening, and we do not need to manufacture a crisis here that doesn't exist. The crisis that does exist is the perpetual underfunding of our schools. So we need to sufficiently fund our schools in a sustainable way so that we can enhance our economy, like Jane was saying.
It's just incredibly important, and we should note that Las Cruces Public Schools has seen an enormous increase in graduation rates. So it's one of the areas where data is showing a lot of success in terms of improving outcomes for young people locally. It's a very important story, and that's a district-wide story, but it's also a story of individual teachers who every day make an enormous difference in our community. Another question.
Hello, how are you all? Good. My name is Alexander Fresquez. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I'm curious to hear all your thoughts on one particular question, on whether you think it's intelligent of us as a community to neglect everyday skills like cooking and cleaning, or more importantly, social skills and empathy in our classrooms and in our curriculum.
Okay, well this kind of relates, I guess, doesn't it, to that last point about ensuring that we have an education that reflects a lot of different issues. These are really important things. Mary, as an educator, we'll start with you on that.
So I believe that we have a duty and a responsibility to teach the things that this gentleman was talking about. And also, an area that I believe we could do so much better in is the social and emotional aspect of learning as well. And that whole ability to work with a diverse group of people and to understand that you don't have to be exactly like that person, but you may come at a problem from different directions. And that creates a rich environment for learning.
Yeah.
So absolutely, we need to be teaching I think ethical responsibility and ethical behavior, how to give back to community. Those are things that kids would be excited about learning,
Yeah.
and we don't take the time that we need to teach kids.
And Betsy, before we move on to the next question, I've got to ask you this question because his question was so wonderful and so on point. It made me think of the fact that, you know, I went to high school in the 1980s. He talked about cooking. And my goodness, I wish when I was in high school that there was home ec class for boys and girls back then. Back then, in my school district outside of Philadelphia, all of the boys took wood shop and metal shop, and all of the girls took home ec. You know, there have been a few more times in my life when I've needed to cook and also had no idea how to sew anything. And this is important. And I know there's research that's done on this that has made change all over the country where we have education that responds to real needs and is importantly not really restricting the growth of our students and their futures.
Well, the good news is they do have culinary arts now. My
There you
son
go.
took it in high
There
school.
you go.
But I can also just say that life skills are so important. And so I think we have had, for a couple of years in this state, this real focus on preparing for college. And I think that's important. But the report that Jane talked about earlier talked about the importance of technical skills as well as preparing students for life. And I think to get back to early childhood, that's what good early childhood programs do. They actually teach life skills. They really should focus on executive functioning, because without children learning about how to sort of get to know themselves and who they are and how to control some of their impulses, they're not going to be successful in elementary school. And that's all social emotional.
Yeah.
And if we don't work on that, so I am so hopeful that we continue pre-K the way it is now, which is lots of play, lots of social emotional development, teaching life skills, and just how to get along with your neighbor.
Yeah, and it seems to me, Betsy, and I don't know how much research has been done on this, that this would be even more important now, because unlike when you and I were kids, young people today can get a very inaccurate idea of life and the way things should be through the internet, through even their phone that they may carry around. And if they aren't learning some other way in school, they may not have a good influence.
Well, basically, this term executive functioning, research has shown that it is more important to achievement in schools than IQ. So if children don't come with it, for whatever reason, it is a good teacher's responsibility to help a child learn the skill of executive functioning, because that will do them great justice in the long run.
Absolutely. All right, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Lori with Engage New Mexico here in Las Cruces. And my question, I guess, is probably for you, Dr. Cahill. We have in the legislature right now 3 early childhood bills that I know of. One to use a portion of the land grant fund for early childhood, one to create the early childhood education department, and one to expand pre-K to try and make it universal. And we seem to, within our legislature, at least in the last few years, finally have reached a kind of critical mass where most of the legislators understand that early childhood education is important. Whether or not they know a lot about early childhood education, there seems to be some kind of understanding that this is important and we should pay attention to it. So my question for you is, what do you want our legislators to really understand as they're working through these bills this legislative session?
And this question's for?
Probably for Dr. Cahill, but any one of the three of you are welcome to answer.
Betsy.
Okay. Yeah, there's quite a lot of activity, which really is exciting to all of us. I think it all depends on a couple of things. If we go towards the Permanent Land Grant Fund and redistribute it, I'm worried about what's going to be let go of in order to fund pre-K without expanding or asking the voters to return to decide to add like 1% towards early care and education, to vote for having that be part of education, because right now it's not. So I have mixed feelings about it. I also worry a little bit about asking the public schools to take on pre-K totally, because they have a lot on their plates as well. And I'm just going to say that maybe they don't do such a great job yet with K through third. I would like to see an alignment between services for families, educational services, as well as holistic services for birth through third grade. To me, no one's asked me this exactly, but to me, ideally, we would have a Department of Early Care and Education, and it would be birth through third grade. Okay. And then whoever, the funding that goes to it would really look at things like early intervention, home visiting for infants and toddlers, because that is really strong evidence-based support. Pre-K, and whether it just resides in the public schools or also in private care is a big debate. As long as everyone's doing a good job, I don't think we have to worry about where it's going to be.
Okay.
But it all needs funding, and we can't do this. And then ideally, if we align pre-K to kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, I think we won't see the fade out that someone mentioned on the video. We do have fade out now, and in the third grade, people will argue, as well as legislators will argue, well, we don't see the difference. It's a wash. People are reading at the same level, whether they went to pre-K or not. And so the question that the teacher asked is, well, what's happening in kindergarten, first and second grade? And there isn't necessary alignment. In fact, a lot of preschool data, information about individual children, never gets to the kindergarten teacher. And then we also know right now, there have been studies that have shown that the math skills that children are coming into kindergarten with, they basically are not built upon.
Okay.
So we have to have an alignment.
So very important stuff. We only have about 5 minutes left, so we have one more question. I want to get to that.
My name is Sue Kane, and I'm moved here from Lincoln, Nebraska. And when I was a high school educator, we did a lot with multicultural education. That was quite a few years ago, and I know you're doing a lot here, but I'd like to have, and it's really been talked about here, but I'd like to have you, what correlation exists between the having results of educational practices that are culturally responsible and multicultural in a society, in a country that has all kinds of cultures and all kinds of people, constantly new immigrants. You know, it's really a challenge to keep up with that, but it's so important, I think, and you've already referred to a lot of this, and some of the questions I had were answered very, very well by the panel. But I think multicultural education for every person in this country is so important. If we don't, we're going to continue to have some of the horrible situations where people who don't understand what they're missing and how rich that opportunity is for us to have a multicultural, we benefit by having a multicultural society very much. And how do we raise our children so that they appreciate that, not just from people that they meet at school, but also from people from other places.
Okay, Mary, you want to add some more on that?
I'll probably toss that one over to Jane.
Okay, Jane, go ahead.
You know, this is so interesting how all these things are really tied together that we've just been talking about. In Finland, which is one of the very high-performing countries on the International Student Assessment Test, they do exactly what Betsy was just talking about. They start at birth with education for parents, and at 6 months they start daycare, where they teach them the children's social emotional skills to be very compassionate, as the gentleman was talking about, to develop a sense of responsibility for self and the well-being of others. And that begins to lay the foundation for openness to listening to others, to being respectful toward others, And they work very carefully to align everything that's done in these early stages from birth up through pre-K with what happens next. Their students don't start formal education until they're 7 years old. And they also go to school the shortest number of hours of any of the high-performing countries. But what happens then, like Mary was talking about, when the students go home, the teachers engage in these professional learning communities where they start planning the next day how they're going to meet the individual needs of each student. And the question that Sue Kane was asking is, to begin to develop a society where all cultures are embraced. It calls for integration of the best of all cultures, as opposed to alignment with, or I'm trying to think of the word I need here. We call it, what is it, when we say we want to assimilate, we're going to assimilate people into our culture. Instead of trying to assimilate people to follow the customs, the culture, the good characteristics of the culture that is most powerful at the moment, if we begin to integrate, we get adults who can listen to one another, who can work together to accomplish things, who can bring home some of their greatest strengths. For instance, the Hispanic community has the lowest rate of suicide. They are very devoted to family. That is a high value for them. The Native American cultures are very good at perpetuating a culture or encouraging, creating a culture where everybody takes turns listening respectfully to one another to hear out the ideas of each person within a community. And so, this is how we begin to get a culturally responsive environment where children can feel, as I said, once again, respected for who they are, and it makes a huge difference in learning outcomes.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, Betsy, and Mary, for joining us for Issues and Answers, New Mexico Public Education. Very important topic, and I'm sure we'll continue the discussion in future programs to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you at home as well. I'm Fred Martino. This program and in-depth journalism in our community is possible because of your support. You can become a member or renew your membership to KRWG Public Media online at krwg.org. Have a good week.